was gonna say, so that actually brings up my next point exactly. So now that after this whole thing has happened with Matthew Stafford, the NFL again, as I mentioned earlier, stated that they're going to be changing the whole NFL testing rule and how they're going to be going about that. So what exactly is the new COVID protocol? And is it really safe for players to come back after just a few days of testing positive for COVID?
All right, so here's the brand new protocol from the NFL. Remember, previously the protocol was 5 days minimum.
Hmm.
Well, now the new protocol is you can return if tests are negative for the POC, which is the point of care test, which is a rapid test, and the PCR test, which is a takes longer for the results to return. If those are negative the next day,
Hmm.
and you had negative tests prior to the positive test, then you're okay to return immediately. So what does this mean? If Stafford tests positive Friday, that means he repeats the testing Saturday morning. If those tests come back negative, he's playing Sunday morning.
Yep.
Now, depending on the turnaround time of the PCR test, which again takes longer than the POC test,
Hmm.
Stafford could potentially be back in less than 2 days. If that PCR test can come back within 12 hours or even less, if Stafford tests positive Saturday, you repeat those tests on Sunday morning, maybe the results are back in time for the late afternoon game or the Sunday night game, which
Hmm.
again brings up the issue of how are the NFL labs and teams going to handle the test result returns? Are
Hmm.
all the teams going to have the same turnaround time for their test? Because it's unfair if they don't have the exact same turnaround time, especially if it's affecting game day.
Yeah, that's the biggest question. That was the biggest thing a lot of fans were saying, that the way it happened was he was put on the list on Saturday and then taken off on Tuesday. So if that would have happened during the season, he would have missed a game for that. So again, it's going to be really weird to see how it's going to vary from team to team this season going forward.
So your other question was, is it safe for a player to return so quickly from a positive test? Well, it's
Hmm.
hard to say for sure, but if asymptomatic throughout, then the risk is probably low. The CDC return to work criteria recommends 2 negative tests at least 24 hours apart before returning. So that means you could return to work as soon as the third day. Well, the NFL protocol right now is allowing you to return on the second day, which is actually a bit faster than the CDC recommendations.
Yeah.
Now, that does not necessarily mean the NFL is doing the wrong thing or it's a bad idea, because no one really knows for sure right now.
Hmm.
Now, an interesting tangent on this that potentially could affect things is for a player to return, he needs to say he is asymptomatic before and after that positive test. Symptoms are subjective and
Yeah.
require self reporting, similar to concussion symptoms.
Hmm.
There's no test a doctor can run to determine if a player has sinus congestion, fatigue, feeling ill, loss of taste or smell, trouble breathing, etc. So if a player really wants to play, he can simply deny that he's having any symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, that kind of goes into the next question I have with the whole antibody test. Is that even useful? And how, if it is useful, how could the NFL use that to determine if players are safe to return to play?
Yeah, John Poole on Twitter asked me that question about the antibody test, which is a good question. So here's
Hmm.
what we think we know about the antibodies right now. Number one, it takes the body 1 to 3 weeks to produce COVID antibodies. It's a gradual increase. Number two, in many people, the antibody decrease is fairly rapid. Third point is some people may never even produce measurable antibodies. Number four, false negative tests are quite possible, meaning you could have antibodies, but the test doesn't detect them. So
Hmm.
the bottom line is doctors don't even know totally what to make of antibody tests right now and how to interpret them. So they don't have a huge amount of usefulness. If Stafford got a negative antibody test right after his COVID positive test, it wouldn't change anything because it's too
Hmm.
early.
Right.
If it was positive, that does actually increase the likelihood that the COVID test was a true positive. Now, if Stafford has a series of negative antibody tests from now until 2 to 3 weeks from now, I would say that does increase the likelihood that he had a false positive COVID test. However, it does not make it definitively a false positive. So I would never say that it's a false positive. I
Yeah.
would still work under the assumption that the COVID test was a true positive. So the bottom line with the antibody test is it may add some information to the clinical picture, but it doesn't change enough to change how Stafford is managed.
Yeah, again, this is going to be an unprecedented season. There's a lot of questions and there's not enough answers. It's basically what we're trying to get at right here. We don't know enough. Nobody really knows enough until we get into it.